Gabe Newell once said, "When you are programming, you are teaching possibly the stupidest thing in the entire universe, a computer, how to do something." Apex is a strongly typed programming language, meaning if we wanted to store some information, we would have to explicitly define what type of information or data it may contain. And Apex, in return, will make sure only that type of information is stored. For example, if we tell Apex that we want to store data of an animal and we assign a monkey to it, it will pass without failure. However, if we assign a person to an animal, Apex will throw an error because a person is not a type of an animal. The monkey is simply a value for the animal data type. If the value and the data type match, Apex will run without any issues. There are various data types in Apex, but today, let's look at primitive data types. Let's start with blob data type. It's a collection of binary data that can be used to store documents, images, audio, video, etc. Boolean data type holds information such as true or false. Any numeric digits that contain a decimal point can either be of type decimal or double. The major difference between these two is that double accepts larger values than decimal. Date, time, and date time are pretty straightforward. If we want to store just the date, we use the date data type. In case of time, use the time data type. Finally, if the information you want must have the date and the time, use the date time data type. Unlike decimal and double, integer and long can hold any numeric digits that do not contain a decimal point. The only difference between integer and long is that the long data type can store more significant numbers. ID data type can hold any 18-character ID that Salesforce generates for all of its components within the platform. It could be either the record ID, page layout, record types, etc. String data type can hold individual or combined values of characters, numbers, or even special characters. Anything represented as single quotes applied to the start and end of value acts as a string. S-object. This data type is specific to Apex programming. It can hold information about any record, whether it be a standard or custom S-object. Each data type we discussed until now can be represented as object data type. Because Apex is an object-oriented programming language, every data type within the language is by default of type object. Let's talk about variables. Variables are something that holds a value. Think of it as a container for a specific data type, for example a string, but it could be anything such as integer, datetime, S-object, blob, and so on. Here's how we define a variable. Starting from the left, first we define what type of information this variable will hold. In this case, it's a string. Next, we enter the name for that variable. It could be anything you like. Then we use an assignment operator to assign a value to that variable. We then give a value and finally use a semicolon to declare the end of our statement. Now let's look at examples for each data type. Let's say we want to convert a string to a blob. To do that, we declare the blob data type, then the variable name. Then we use one of the built-in Apex classes. For now, just understand that Apex has built-in classes for every data type, and those classes have methods that can be used to manipulate information. Next, we use dot notation to access a method called valueOf. This will allow us to convert a string to blob. Once we define the method, we can then pass the string data as a parameter to the method. The variable can then be used to create a PDF or a document with string value written in it. We will discuss more on built-in Apex classes in upcoming videos. To declare a Boolean value, we declare the Boolean data type and the variable name and assign the value as true or false. Note that there are no single quotes required. Just write true or false in plain words. Next, declare a variable for decimal or double with their variables and assign a value with a decimal point. The only thing to note here is that a decimal holds no more than 25 digits, including the digits before and after the decimal point. If the value contains more than 25 digits, use double data type and append the letter D at the end of the value. That way, the system will know it's a double and not a decimal. Let's say we want to store today's date in our Apex code. To accomplish that, we first declare the date data type. Declare a variable for it. Finally, we use the date Apex class to get a method called today, which will give us today's date in a date format. But what if we want to construct a new date? Let's say we want to store the date for Christmas 2023. Easy as it can be. We use a method called new instance of the built-in date class and pass in 3 parameters: the year, the month, and the day. Now, you might be wondering, why don't we just assign a value in a human readable format instead of using the date class? And the answer is Apex doesn't support that. For instance, we define a date in the following pattern: What will happen now is that Apex will interpret this as an integer, and because integers can't have a forward slash in them, Apex will rewrite the whole expression as 0. As a result, we get an error saying illegal assignment from integer to date. Furthermore, let's define the date in a string format, which results in illegal assignment from string to date. This is because a string value can't be assigned to a date variable. Perhaps we want to store a time rather than a date. In this case, we declare a variable of time data type and use the time class to access a method called newInstance and pass in 4 parameters in a defined order, such as hours in 24 hours format, minutes, seconds, and milliseconds. Remember that the parameters must be in a specific order that the built-in class method accepts, meaning you can't pass seconds parameter before the minutes parameter and so on. A quite possible scenario is where a developer would want to store the date and the time. To do so, declare a data type called datetime, then declare the variable name that will store the datetime value. Finally, we use the datetime class to use the now method, which will magically get our date and the time. On the other hand, what if we want to construct a new datetime in GMT or universal time format? For example, we want to store the date and time from when Christmas Day starts. In this case, we use the newInstance GMT method of the datetime class and pass in 6 parameters in a specific order, beginning with the year, the month, the day, the hour, the minutes, and the seconds. Integer and long store numeric values without decimal points. The only difference between these two is that the integer data type can only hold a value of 11 digits. For values above 11 digits, prefer using long data type. When declaring a long data type, don't forget to append the letter L at the end of the value. ID and string data type are represented as a string with single quotes. The ID data type must be assigned a valid 18-character ID from the Salesforce org. In comparison, the string data type has no restrictions and will accept any value as long as it's surrounded by single quotes. There are times when we are required to do create, read, update, and delete operations on SObject record. To do that, we must initialize the SObject by defining the data type as the SObject API name, assigning a variable, and using the new keyword to let Apex know we are dealing with new initialization, and finally call the SObject class. By default, every SObject in Salesforce will have its Apex class defined. Here's an example of a custom SObject being initialized. Last but not least, let's look at how we use a generic object to assign any value to it. First, we declare the object data type, define a variable for it, and then assign an integer. We could do the same for string, standard object, custom SObject, and any other primitive data type we like. There are a few things to remember before starting to code in Apex. Number 1, Apex is case insensitive, meaning if we create a variable called student name with capital N in the name word, and then further down in our code, we declare another variable with the same name, but this time we make the n small, we get an error saying duplicate field. This brings us to my second point. Use a naming convention for all your variable declarations to avoid this issue. Camel case is one of the most common naming convention that Apex programmers use. Point number 3, blob, date, time, and datetime cannot have direct values assigned to them. Instead, use the built-in Apex classes and its methods. Number 4, never forget the semicolon at the end of a variable declaration. Point number 5, reserved keywords. These are keywords that are being used by Apex, which cannot be used by programmers as variable names. For example, keywords such as virtual, export, collect, and continue. Let's say we use the virtual keyword as the variable name. When the code compiles, we get an unexpected token error. The same goes for continue, export, and collect. To check out the full list of reserved keywords, follow the link in the description. Finally, practice. Practice makes perfect. Here's a scenario for you to practice on what you learned so far. A student wants to register for one of the school programs, and the registrar requires the following information. Your job is to determine the data type for each information and the syntax for variable definition. This has been primitive data type and variable definition in Apex. If you found this video helpful, please do like and subscribe. Don't forget to comment your practice answers in the comment section down below, and I will see you in the next one. Until then, be safe and take care. Peace.